Welcome to Revitalize and Replant with Mark Clifton, where we equip pastors to take their churches from declining to thriving by pointing them to a new future and a new hope. Join us weekly for encouragement and practical advice in your pastoring journey.
You know, it is so amazing that we do these episodes, just almost a couple of times a week, and the things that we can talk about, and it's so easy to come up with topics to talk about.
It is, isn't it?
When you're talking about churches that need to be revitalized and renewed, what are those things? And you can't really put them all in priority, but they definitely need to be talked about. And today, we're talking about a little bit more of a physical, practical thing. And we're going to talk about things that you can do to immediately improve your building.
And they don't cost a lot of money.
No, they don't cost a lot.
Well, they cost some money, maybe.
But it's not like you're going to overspend, take your whole year's budget or anything like that. So my name is Dan Hurst, and I have the privilege of working here with Mark Clifton on this as we talk about this. And we have a guest who has gone through this whole process of improving the building. And so, Mark, why don't you introduce him?
This is Mark Halleck. We've been with Mark now for several weeks. We're out here in Denver, Colorado at Mark's church, Calvary Church, a great replant that replants churches and raises up replanters from all across North America. And so we're grateful to have Mark join us on the replant couch. Kyle, man, you need to take a picture of this couch.
I know.
And then we need to put it on the website or put it someplace out there.
It's a great couch.
This is a glorious couch.
It's an old school couch. We're proud of the couch.
1960s. It used to be white. No kidding. It used to be white. It is now not white.
Yeah. This probably would not be, given the topic today.
Yes.
I don't know if we should probably be keeping this baby around.
Probably not.
We're using it. It's
Probably
pretty soft.
Not. So it's
But what
soft.
you don't do is put it out on the curb in front of the church.
No, that's right. No, I'm so glad you guys are here, man. I love you guys. This is a joy to be able to be with you.
We want to talk today about how you can do some things that are important in and around your building to make a statement about your church. Now, let's just understand that we did have a seminary student who told us the other day that the church is not a building. And the church isn't something you go to.
Right.
The church is who you are.
It's who you are.
I mean, I had never heard that. It was just life-changing to me.
Well, with that in mind, and now that we've learned,
yes,
let's talk about the outside of the church.
The church. There is a place where you gather. And I know I'm being facetious. I don't want to be sarcastic. I guess that ship already sailed. Yeah. But I want to be facetious. You and I know the church is not a building.
Right.
But the lost community identifies us with that building.
Exactly right.
Right?
That's right.
So they don't say, well, that's not a church. It's just a building. They say, that's the church.
Yep.
So how your church building looks reflects how they feel, how you look, and what they understand who you are. And so that's why we want your building to be a good place that reflects well on Christ and that can be used for his work in your community. That's why the building matters.
You know, the thing that comes to mind is you were talking we should probably save this point for another point that we're going to be talking about later, but I have to bring it up right now while it's on my mind. Otherwise, I'll forget it. You know about that.
Yeah, like I do every week, yes.
And that is signs that churches put out. You know, the church sign.
Oh yes.
With all of the pithy little sayings, you know, that they're...
Don't do that. Just don't do that.
Don't do it.
Just don't do that. Our church, our Sundays are super sweet, and it's spelled S-U-N-D-A-Y. You know. By the way, church signs. Okay, you ready? We may not get through this podcast. We may not get through this podcast.
Oh, boy, here we go.
There might be
here we go.
Phase two.
But Dan and I have known each other for 50 years. We've helped each other. We've gotten in each other's way planting churches. And his dad was preaching a revival at my church when I was just about in my early 20s. And we had a revival out at the church I'd planted. And I rented one of these marquees, these changeable marquees that you could pull behind a trailer. And I rented one of these changeable marquees, and I put it on the lawn of Castle View Baptist Church. And it said, revival, every night, 7 p.m. Like lost people are going to get in car wrecks trying to get there because of that sign. But nonetheless, I still put the sign out there. So I drive up on Sunday morning, and Dan has found the where I kept the letters in my office, and it said, milk $1.29 a gallon, cigarettes $1.17 a pack.
They were standing in line.
Unbelievable.
But most, you see these church signs that have everything on it except the website. right?
Right.
And that's the only thing you need right now is the name of the church and the website.
That's right.
Maybe the time of your worship service.
Yeah,
but they put the pastor's name. They don't unless you're Billy Graham. I mean, they don't really know who you are.
No, that's right.
But they do need to see your website. There's been a lot of studies done. Almost 100% of the folks who are visiting for the first time, if you have a website, they're going to check you out online before they come in.
That's
so
right.
we can do a whole other podcast on the website. But church signs, absolutely. Do not put those. I shouldn't say that because there's a lot of people out there who've invested a lot of money in those changeable signs. They've even bought the little books.
The books that tell you what. Yeah.
Well, at least make sure the website's on there.
Make sure the website's on there. But listen, if you've got a changeable sign, put something like this. Castle View Baptist, we love our students. We pray for our teachers. We pray for our first responders. Do something that's positive. Just saying something superficial and silly just makes you look marginal. Like your message isn't really even important. It doesn't really even matter.
Well, and here's the other thing, man. If you want to talk about kryptonite in so many churches, it's the cheese factor.
Yeah.
You've got to avoid cheese at every corner. That's what I would say. We could do a whole podcast on cheesiness. But I'll tell you what, there's nothing worse than a cheesy sign.
I know.
There's just nothing worse.
Well, let's imagine this is I'm careful about this because we've all struggled with it. I know Frank Lewis used to be the pastor at First Nashville, said that when you preach on Sunday morning, every person you preach to, their life will be affected either by addiction or by cancer before they die, either them or a loved one or someone they're close to.
Yeah.
So let's say you're going to, an oncologist, and he decides it's cool to put out in front of his sign some stupid, silly little joke. Or you're going to some place that helps your children deal with addictions, and there's a silly little joke sign out front.
Wow.
What we're dealing with is far more important
That's
than a
right.
silly little joke.
That's
So
right.
be careful what you put on those signs.
Amen.
And along the same point with dealing with the outside, change the light bulbs. Get light bulbs that are when you start mixing LED and regular filament lights and everything, they're different. It's just cheap. It looks cheap.
You can
make it
get
look
LED right now at such a low cost, and you can light that church up at night and really make it visible. And then rake the leaves, mow the grass, trim the hedges, pick up the trash.
That's right. Yep.
Make it look like somebody lives here. Make it look like you're proud of the property. I mean,
Which, by the way, Mark, can I just say this real quick? One of the things that God put on my heart when I first came, and I've tried to do this each Sunday, is as I'm praying in the morning when I come to the church, I pick up the trash. A couple of things that does. One is it reminds me as a pastor, I must be the chief servant of all. Okay.
All right.
But secondly, practically, there's trash all over the place. You know what I mean? Who's going to pick up the trash?
Got to be picked up.
So what I would say is, man, if you're a pastor, lead the way.
Right.
Pick up that trash. It says something about how you care about your facility.
Yeah.
Or if you have interns,
Well, that's true. That's servant leadership.
Let's go inside the building. Let's talk about restrooms and the children's area.
Yeah, those are two areas of real need. I was doing a replant consultation one time, and I took this young potential pastor, and his wife and daughter. She was about 3 or 4, and we were meeting in the church basement. How many times do I tell you we meet in church basements? With the pastor search committee of this dying church, and with this pastor and his wife and little girl. And one of the women on the search committee said, the nursery is right next door if you want to go next door and let your little girl play in there. So sure enough, the mother took the little girl, her name was Annabelle, took Annabelle next door. Annabelle looks in that nursery, and this is what she says. Mama, this is a garage sale. because mother had taken Annabelle to garage sales, and that nursery looked like a garage sale because it was full of old junky toys, old stuffed animals. Yeah. Of course, there were no children in that church.
Right.
Go in your preschool area. I'm just going to cut to the chase. Find a nice, large church in your community, a Southern Baptist church in your association that has a children's director. And just go to that pastor and say, would someone from your church come over here, take a look at our nursery room, and help us decide what to keep and what to throw away?
That's really good.
I'm not going to tell you what to do. They'll know what to do.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't keep anything you can't sterilize. Some things aren't safe. And parents look in that room, and if what they see is really off-putting, you got a big problem.
That's right. And why that's so good? Why is that true?
Well, because we live in a time and an age very different than we did years ago. So just go to your director of missions in your association, your state convention, or a church near you that's got a children's director or children's volunteer leader, and say and they would be delighted to come over and show you what to do in your children's area. In your restrooms, clean them, paint them. When at Warnell, we our restrooms were really bad looking, and we didn't have any money. And all of a sudden, this is in Kansas City when I was replanting it, and all of a sudden, the Kansas City Chiefs coach his wife, the coach Haley, was the coach of the Chiefs at the time, and his wife and Lamar Hunt's widow and Clark Hunt's wife, they wanted to do something for young. We had a ministry for expectant mothers who chose life rather than abortion. Yeah. And so these ladies, along with some of the chiefs' wives, wanted to come and do a ministry for these young mothers that we were reaching, that were choosing to keep their children in very difficult situations. It was a pro-life event.
Gotcha.
Okay? I could have just said that and saved us all 5 minutes.
We followed you, kind of.
But I was freaking out because here's some Kansas City Chiefs wives, the owners, the Hunts, the Chiefs. They're going to come to our church, and our restrooms look awful. Right. And so I was trying to convince our people, my leaders, we need to go ahead and spend some money and clean up these restrooms. And they were like, I think there's something in the Bible about, trying to impress rich people and all that. And I said, okay, whatever. You're probably right. So what we did do, though, we had some signs made up. And we said, look, we realize our restrooms look atrocious because they were old and looked atrocious.
We're just naming reality.
We realize that, but at this point, we choose to spend our resources on reaching the community. Someday later, we will address these restrooms.
Wow.
Now, you can say whatever you want about that, but if I walk into a church and the restrooms look bad, by bad, I don't mean dirty. I mean, old and worn out. And you go, you know what? I get that. They've chosen to. At least there's some self-acknowledgement there. So that's what we did.
Well, at least though, keep them filled up with toilet paper and paper towels to dry your hands.
That was
and
a long
like that.
story for nothing. In a 20-minute podcast, I'd like to have that back.
Well, it goes
Can
along
we rewind
with
the tape and start over again?
It goes along with the next point, which is not only the restrooms in the children's area, but clean up the inside, the paint and the smell. Oh my goodness, the smell. And Kyle mentioned something also about the asbestos.
Yes.
A lot of older churches have to deal with that.
Got to
sort
be
of
really
thing.
careful. If you want to pull up carpet, it may be put down with asbestos glue. If you want to remove ceiling tile, it may have asbestos. Go to your association, your state convention, ask somebody to help you come in and do an audit of your building so that you don't get into real trouble with some of that stuff. Also, the lead paint, you got to look at all of those kinds of things for sure. Absolutely.
That's great.
One of the things that we definitely need to talk about when we're talking about things that you can do to improve your building is talk about your audio.
Yes.
In your
I'm sorry, what?
The audio.
What?
And along with that, with a lot of churches now getting involved in video with doing their on Facebook or YouTube or whatever.
Or live streaming.
Yeah, live streaming. So what do you do as a church? Make a decision. What are we going to do? Are we going to just like, oh yeah, we'll put a mic up there? The problem is that people come to a church, and if they expect it to sound bad, and you satisfy them that it sounds bad, that's what they're going to talk about. That place sounds awful.
Right.
But if you give them a nice, clean sound that isn't feeding back, and people are sitting anywhere in the auditorium and they can actually hear and understand, they'll talk about that.
Dan, this is kind of your bread and butter. What would you say to a pastor who just heard you say that? Say, yes, how do I get there? What do I need to do?
There are mixing boards that are powered. You don't have to go buy a bunch of different kinds of equipment and processing equipment. You don't have to get all of that. But there are mixing boards that are powered. You can put back there and plug your microphones into it. And you don't even have to have a sound booth. You can have somebody just sitting up to the side of the platform that's keeping track of all of that and making sure that you EQ, because most of those mixing boards have EQ, and you want to make the EQ so you're not sounding tinny and you're not getting this real hiss coming through, and you're not getting feedback from on the low ends either. So it's just a nice, balanced, clean sound.
Here's the deal. Just like we said a few moments ago about go to a larger church in your community that has a children's director and ask her or him to take a look at your preschool area. Go to a larger church that has a good audio visual, get good sound, and say, would you... That's what we did at Linwood. We've had guys from Lenexa Baptist.
And you've got a great setup.
We've had guys come out there, and they've shown us how we ought to do it, how we ought to set it up, all that kind of thing. And you're right. We're at a time now where you don't have to spend as much as you think you do.
No.
Yeah.
The prices have come down in that kind of technology to get something really good. But you probably need to go to another larger church that does this on a daily basis works with this kind of stuff, and they'll give you don't just call a sound company because they'll try to sell you a bunch of stuff. But call another church, have them come out and take a look at it, and give you an audit of your sound system, because Dan is 100% right. A bad sound system where people can't hear, or a sound system where people don't know how to run it, right?
Yeah.
And the poor guy, the lady's sitting back there, and she keeps messing it up, and everybody gives them the evil eye.
They get that eye,
They
don't
get
they?
that eye.
Yeah.
It's just a terrible feeling. So for sure,
Yeah.
deal with that.
Now, along with that, though, is are you going to run this on Facebook or YouTube, or you're going to live stream or anything like that? You've got to have the right equipment. That does get into a little bit more of a price.
Does.
You need to have. You can start very cheaply with just doing Facebook,
Right?
And you can use a camera, your iPhone for that,
Right?
And you can be on. But the problem with that is you have to make sure that the sound is right. Because normally, if you're just using your iPhone, it's going to pick up ambient sound in the auditorium, and it'll pick up people, making noise, laughing, talking, whatever the case may be.
Crying.
So you have to be very careful about this.
Snoring.
The snoring really gets to you during the
Snoring
sermon,
gets to
doesn't
me.
it?
Yeah,
those are things that you have to consider about that. And it does, like I said, it doesn't have to be expensive. But it does have to be good.
So take care of the
right.
outside of your building. Make sure your sign has your website on it, which means you have to have a website, but that's a whole nother podcast. Yeah. Make sure your restrooms look clean and are at least somewhat addressed. Your children's area is clean and sanitary, and your sound system is a working sound system that people can actually hear.
Yeah, and one more thing.
What's that?
You got to think about this. What image are we presenting? In the way of signage. In the way of, we already talked about signs, of course, but you got to have the right kinds of signs on your this church, Mark. Your church here has done a great job of that. I've noticed that your signs around there, they're compelling. They fit. You've got some seasonal ones up that they look like they're just that you're using them for the season.
And
obviously,
the church has the logo has a certain font and certain colors.
Yeah.
And so all of the signs in the church use the same font and the same colors.
Exactly.
Yeah. And another thing that you need to take stock of is every church, and people do this, small businesses do this, everybody thinks they have to have a brand, So we got to come up with a logo, or a slogan, we're in the world for the world, or whatever the case may be,
let me write that one down.
Yeah, it's
Kyle, write that down.
No, it's copyrighted.
I've just changed.
It's copyrighted. It's copyrighted. I'm sorry. Yeah, I trademarked it
in the
many
world
years
for
ago.
the world.
So here's
in the world and of the world.
Yeah. So here's what you have to remember: branding. And I'll probably get some marketing people who respond to this and argue with me, but they're wrong. Branding is what other people say about you. Branding isn't what you want other people to say about you. Branding isn't coming up with a slogan that says, "Oh, they're the church with a heart for the community." That's not branding. Branding is what other people think about you.
Ooh,
so you need to go through a process where you begin asking people, "What do you think about our church? What is it that we need to be?"
Because that's your real brand.
That is your real brand.
What people think about you is your brand.
Yeah. So
right.
if you begin to enhance that, and people are saying that about you, then you enhance that. All of a sudden, you take that ownership of that ministry, if you will. They begin to identify your ministry by what they think about you.
It's good.
So that branding is a very important part. Who you are, it's and it can be anything. But ask your people, what do you think about our church? Ask people that don't go to your church, what do you think about our church?
Right.
And you'll begin to discover what your
And
real
when you
brand
find out they don't think anything about it, that tells you something
Yeah,
too.
so you need to do
No,
something.
I'm serious
That's
about
true.
that.
That's
If
true.
they don't think anything about it, then it really says you're not making any impact and nobody has any idea. And you got a problem that a website and a logo will not solve.
Exactly.
All right.
Well-
Lastly, let me throw an extra one
Okay.
in. Sometimes your churches smell.
Boy, that's true.
It's just a mixture of old paneling, silk plants. I've said it so many times. Not every church with a flower room is a dying church, but every dying church has a flower room.
Yeah.
And so every dying church has silk plants, and many of them haven't been dusted since Jimmy Carter was president.
Can I ask something real quick?
Yes.
Why is that? I'm a different generation. So, what's with the silk?
Over time, people just thought, well, you ought to put a plant here. So they put one, then they put another, and they were throwing them away. And back in the 70s,
fake plants
back
everywhere.
in the 70s,
Just fake
80s,
plants.
you put fake plants everywhere. You had
Okay.
silk plants.
Wow.
Seriously. And you see them in all kinds of dying churches.
Yeah.
And they're not really I shouldn't say this because people are listening and maybe they really like their silk plants. If you've got silk plants, wash them off. Clean off those
Clean 'em
leaves.
up. Clean 'em up.
Get the dust off of them.
Well, the other thing too is if you're going to use plants and you're going to put flowers up front on the altar, don't make it look like a funeral.
No.
That's,
Actually, you mentioned that. I was so proud of myself. I shouldn't say, I was. At Linwood, we were talking about, this was back at Christmas, so we're several months ago at Christmas. We're going to have Christmas Eve service. Linwood's a little church I pastor. We have about 40, 50 people out in the town of 400. And I said, you know what, guys and ladies, if you'll do this kind of decoration, I'll be responsible for going to getting all the poinsettias and bringing them in. So I went to Sam's Club. They had them for like $12.95 a piece. I bought, time's up. We got to hurry. I'm talking fast. So I bought all these poinsettias and I brought them in and I put them all up at the front there. And my wife walks in and she says, "Who died?" And then our associate pastor High walks in and goes, "When's the funeral?"
Oh, man.
And I said, "All right." So they went and rearranged them because it looked like you said. It looked like a funeral. So you got to be careful about that.
Yeah, you have to.
But I agree, whether it's the silk plants or whether it's your fake plants up front or whether it's the draperies that need to be taken down so light can come in, whether it's the pictures that have been up since the 1970s, take some photos of some people in your church now, blow those up, put those in frames, make it look like something's happening now.
That's good.
Clean up your church so that it doesn't smell. When people walk in, it doesn't smell old and musty. I honestly, Yankee Candle could come up with church basement and we would know what it smelled like. We've all been there. And so clean it up, put in some air fresheners so that your church doesn't smell.
Yeah, or smell too strong. That's the other thing
right.
too. You have
Smell
to be
too
careful
strong.
about that.
All right,
let's wrap this thing up. 6 things you can do, actually more than 6, we've come up with that, to improve your building, and I hope that's been helpful to you. Please subscribe to the podcast. Press on the button, click on the button right there and subscribe, and we'll see you again in a few days. Thank you, Mark and Mark. It's been a pleasure to be
Mark
with
and
you
Mark.
today.
Yes.
And,
I like Mark and Mark.
Hey, that
like
works.
Shane and Shane. That's
That
how they
works.
got started.
Look out, Shane.
You know about Shane and Shane? I like Shane. I'm not so big on Shane, though.
Oh,
Yeah.
he's here all week, folks.
Kyle, it's time to fade.
Thanks for joining us today on Revitalize and Replant. This podcast is brought to you by the North American Mission Board, where we help dying or struggling churches regain health for the glory of God and the good of their communities. If you found this conversation helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. To learn more about becoming a replanting pastor or to explore resources about revitalization for your own church, visit churchreplanters.com.